Hey everyone, so if you couldn't tell, MapleStory is one of my favorite games, and with the game's development beginning all the way back in the early 2000s and the Korean beta going live over 23 years ago in 2002, it probably wouldn't surprise you to know that there's a lot of content in MapleStory from those early days that went unused or was removed pretty early on, or also just content that we didn't get to see in GMS and was exclusive to things like Korea. Well, in my time being perpetually addicted to this mushroom game from the early 2000s, I've learned a lot about these things and these unused features, and I think a lot of them are really cool. So today I wanted to make a video to show off all of the lost beta content from MapleStory or similar things that I could find, various aspects of the game from way back in the 2000s during its beta and early days that were unused or scrapped or lost and forgotten to time. Well, for the most part anyway. So let's get right into it. So just to clarify, everything that I talk about in this video is going to be from very early versions of MapleStory, like either the beta or like super early like MapleStory launch. There's a lot of unused stuff that was also from later versions of the game, but for this video, I just want to focus on those early versions. Oh, and before we begin, I just want to give a quick shout out to Wacky Racer over on Discord. They have a lot of experience with MapleStory and its game files, and so I asked them for some input on a few of these things on the list here, and they also gave me a few new ones to talk about, so thank you to Wacky Racer. Alright, so first, let's bring it all the way back to 2002. The first webpage for MapleStory in Korea opened on November 18th, 2002, and their first closed beta started on December 12th, 2002. I don't know exactly how exclusive this closed beta was, but we have some footage of it right here. So one thing that's kind of cool about this video is on the Korean wiki for MapleStory that everyone uses called Namu Wiki, this is noted as the oldest known footage of MapleStory. So we don't know the exact time this video was taken, but we can kind of guess it was around this time of the first closed beta. So the first thing that probably grabs your attention here is there's these interesting snow-like particles floating from the top of the screen to the bottom. And it's kind of interesting because we never got this in any area in the game in our final version of the game that we ended up getting. The closest thing that we have is like the cash shop weather effect thing that you could buy to like buff your party, but we never got this in any specific area. So I'm guessing that this was probably just like a effect that they put in certain areas of the game, like maybe this was one for Sleepywood, and you'll see some more about this later in some other videos that we have. But the other thing you probably notice is you have this really interesting like hexagonal kind of metallic looking UI, which is notoriously known as the Korean beta UI. This beta UI kind of ended up going away before we even got to see the first versions of the game in the West. But you can see here that it's a very early version of the UI, and it has this kind of interesting theme to it. I don't really know what to call it besides like blue, white, and hexagonal. I actually think it looks pretty cool, but I definitely understand why they went with what they did for the final version. So one thing you'll also notice about this footage is everyone here is a warrior, and that's because in the first closed beta for MapleStory in Korea, warrior was the only class available, and they actually didn't release the other classes until later. The next beta had archer, and then after that they added magician and thief in the following closed betas. And funny enough, the game actually launched in Korea without second job even available. They only had first job and the 4 classes. One other thing you'll note here that's cool is the portal color is like this interesting like purplish blue, and it's just a completely different portal than what we see in the final version. And one last thing to note here as well is you can see on the footage that they have a mini-map, but it's different than the one that we got. It's a lot less detailed, and I think there's maybe some text in the bottom left corner, but I can't really tell because the resolution's not very good. So in this next video you can see here, you can see the same group of people exploring the ant tunnel. So we don't get to see them in the town of Sleepywood, but we do get to see them before Sleepywood and inside the ant tunnel. And as you can see, the particles are gone, and they're just kind of wandering through here. But one thing you can tell is there's a bunch of mobs here that are not normally in the ant tunnel, at least in this section. Like you have snails, you have, you can see later like stumps and evil eyes in places that they're not normally in the full release game that we got. You do see horny mushrooms, which were there in the version, and also you don't really see any zombie mushrooms here, which is kind of interesting. The final version that we got in the West only had, in this part of the ant tunnel, horny mushrooms and zombie mushrooms. And then later as they go on in the video here, you can see that the little like snowy, puffy particles do come back. So maybe it was just for certain parts of the ant tunnel, maybe it was an entirely different system that we have no idea what it was. Yeah. And you can also see here that there's like some like octopus here as well. So just a bunch of different mobs in the ant tunnel that you normally wouldn't see here. And as for the map layouts, they seem pretty similar. They are a little bit different, it looks like, but generally the same kind of thing that we know from the final game. Alright, so next let's talk about some of the rare and unused maps in old MapleStory. So the first thing I want to talk about is the old free market maps. Before we got that one big free market that we all remember, they actually at one point had free markets for individual towns. So they had one for Hennessy's, Parion, Elnath, and Ludibrium. Now, the Hennessy's one and Parion one, I believe, were used in the game. I'll show some footage of them here, but I'm pretty sure these were actually accessible back in the day. And people could go into them and just buy and sell items as usual. But I believe the Elnath and Ludibrium ones were a bit different. The Elnath one was actually something people could get to through a bug where I believe I heard people could get there by dying in Happyville. They'd be warped to this free market map. But it wasn't ever intentionally accessible. And the Ludibrium, while it's in the game files and was partially complete, it was never actually accessible. And you can see here that the portals in this map weren't even finished. So it was kind of scrapped before it was even finished actually, which is kind of sad because it looks kind of cool. But I think that the final version we got of the free market is better because you can get more people all together instead of splitting it up based on towns, even if the aesthetic is kind of cool this way. Now, the big next thing I want to talk about actually isn't really unused content, or at least most of it, but it's really old and kind of forgotten content that I personally find really cool. I want to talk about the old GM event maps. When I was looking into this, I found it was actually really hard to find information about these, so I'm actually going to treat this as a place where I can tell you guys about how all these events worked exactly, down to a T, and it'll be a nice place to just have this information so it won't necessarily be forgotten. Alright, so we're just going to go through them one by one, starting with a personal favorite of mine called Find the Jewel. This event was also called Treasure Hunt in later versions, but when it first initially released, I believe it was called Find the Jewel. Alright, so the way that this event worked was players were initially moved to the starting event map. This was like an Alinea themed waiting room where players could all wait together for the event to officially start. Typically GMs would show an information panel to players before the event actually starts so they know what to do, and they would give it some time and then they would officially open the portal so players could go through and start the event. So as you can see, there's a portal on the bottom here, and there's 4 portals above. The portal on the bottom is the one the GMs have to open so that the players can go to access the 4 portals above. And the portals on the top would take them to 4 different maps in which they could hunt for treasure. Each of these 4 portals led to their own big map where the players would have to go into them and hunt for boxes that could contain treasure. These super big maps would have up to 20 boxes in them that players could find, and they also had invulnerable enemies that would, try to damage and knock back the player, and the players would have to avoid. The enemies were themed on the area as well. Each big map also had 3 hidden secret rooms that were smaller, and these secret rooms contained up to 2 boxes that players could find. Not every box would contain treasure, but some boxes would contain what's called a treasure scroll, and this was a scroll that you could get and turn into any of the Viking NPCs that were at the start of each big map. Giving a treasure scroll to one of the Viking NPCs would result in the player winning the event, or being one of the winners. And so when they did this, they were warped to the event victory map, where they would be able to talk to another NPC and get their prize, which I'll tell you about later. Winning any of the events that I'm talking about in this video, by the way, would result in leading to this map, so they would all get the same reward. The thing that I think is really cool about this event is just these really big new maps. I feel like these maps really encapsulate the feeling of old MapleStory in those like early or beta days, and it's just so cool to me because I had no idea these maps even existed until a couple years ago, so going through them and walking through them was almost like finding a part of the game that fit the vibe of the rest of it, but I had no idea existed, so it was like discovering something new about one of my favorite games. One thing I noticed about these maps is they actually include a fair bit of assets that were never used in other areas of the game, as you can see here in this video. So I think it's just really cool that they had all these assets here and they were used exclusively for the lucky people who were able to attend these GM events. So now let's talk about the next event. So the next one I want to talk about is the physical fitness test. This was a jump quest that had 3 stages and kind of was actually pretty difficult. I was lucky enough to attend a few of these actually during my time playing the actual old MapleStory back in the day, and so even though I never won, I definitely remember it being very fun and difficult. So the way this worked is it was just kind of like a normal jump quest with 3 stages, but there were super junior Nekis scattered throughout, which are invulnerable junior Nekis that don't really do much damage, but they just serve like as a obstacle to kind of obstruct the player that they have to avoid. And so the only thing was there was a time limit for the event, and so if you could reach the end before the time limit was up, then you'd get the winning prize. Otherwise, you would just be warped out to back where you were before the event began, and you didn't get anything. Though one thing I do want to note is that players actually got an event trophy that they could sell to NPCs for 50k or just keep, just for participating and entering the event. So even if they didn't get anything for doing the event, they did get this trophy at least. Alright, let's talk about the next event. So the next one is called Ola Ola. This was an event where basically there were random portals to get to the top. You can't jump during this event, and essentially there's just a bunch of ladders that you have to climb up and try to pick the right portal to go through. There is a correct portal, but it's just random, and going through the wrong portal will either warp you to the beginning of the current level you're on, or just not do anything at all. The event has 3 levels, and once you get to the end, you win. But if you, I guess, ran out of time, then you didn't win. So it's kind of a simple event, and I personally never got to do this one, but yeah, that's Ola Ola. Alright, for the next event, we have the XO quiz. For this event, players were all warped to a unique map that had an X on the left side and an O on the right side. The GM would ask players questions, and they'd have to go on the right side based on true or false, or yes or no. If you got a question wrong, you'd be kicked out, and basically the last players standing were the winners. I guess the GMs just asked as many questions as they wanted really, maybe it was like 5 or 10 questions, but no matter how many, if you got one wrong, you were out. Alright, so the next one's called Coconut Harvest. This event was added pretty early on, and the way this one worked was players were split into 2 teams, one called Maple Team and one called Story Team. Each player had red or blue swimming trunks or a bathing suit that were automatically equipped and based on the team that your player was on. Red for Maple Team and blue for Story Team, I believe. So the objective for this event is to go with your team and knock down as many coconuts from the trees in the map as fast as you can within the time limit. There was a counter at the top of the screen that kept track of the amount of coconuts that each team had knocked down, and when the time ran out, the team with the most coconuts knocked down wins. So it's a pretty straightforward event overall, but one thing that actually made it a little bit more difficult was, unlike the coconuts in Florida Beach that take a certain amount of hits to knock down, I believe it's like 4 or 3 hits, the coconuts here actually took a variable amount of hits to be knocked down, so it could be like 1 hit, or 2 hits, or 3 hits, or 4 hits, and some of them actually didn't ever get knocked down no matter how many times you hit them, which was kind of evil of the game developers to do, because it would just lead to people wasting their time hitting one coconut thinking they could knock it down, but really they never could in the first place. So that's about it for Coconut Harvest. Alright, so this next one's kind of cool. It's called Snowball, and in this event, players were also, just like the last one, split up into 2 different teams, Maple Team and Story Team. The way that this worked is players were warped into a map where one team would be on the top and the other would be on the bottom. And each team has their own snowball that they have to hit to try to push it as far as they can to the right. Whichever team is able to get their snowball furthest to the right is the winner of the event, and the other team loses. And one thing that's kind of interesting is each team had their own snowman on the left that they could hit to slow the other team's snowball rolling down. Alright, and now for our last event, we actually have something that I believe went unused and is really interesting. So there's a map in the game files that actually has kind of like a tournament style layout that I believe would have been used for some kind of minigame tournament. As you can see on this map, there's like various levels and floors for people to play minigames on, which I believe would have been like a bracket style competition where people would be eliminated, and if you won enough minigames, you could go to the top and then you could stand on, you know, the first, second, or third prize place up above, depending on the place that you ended up in for the tournament. And one more kind of cool thing to note here is there's also these like tournament bracket style images found in the game files, which I believe would have been used either for this event or something similar. So you can see those here on the screen now. It's possible that this map was used in some kind of like minigame event that they did like very rarely, but I've never heard of it, and I heard that these tournament files just went completely unused. So yeah. Alright, so now let's talk about if you won an event, what you would actually have to do to get your prize. So I mentioned earlier that when you win an event, you're taken to the event victory map or winner map, which would essentially give you some kind of reward. There was a clown NPC on this map that you could talk to, and they would essentially congratulate you, and they would give you what's called a scroll of secrets. I also believe that this scroll was called Devil Scroll in earlier versions of the game, but I guess it was changed later. Maybe it just sounded like too evil or something. It's worth noting that the event failure or like exit map had a similar style of NPC, just a different colored clown, but yeah, they didn't give you anything. They just warp you out and that's it. So now, once you win an event and you get your Scroll of Secrets, you actually can take it to one of two NPCs. You can go to Chunji in Kerning City, who's just to the left of Kerning City, or you can go to Genie in Ludibrium. They both have a different quest for you to do to get your prize. If you go talk to Chunji, he's going to ask that you bring him back 50 Charms of the Undead, and then once you do, he'll give you a magic box. And if you go to Genie in Ludibrium, he's going to require that you go kill some tricksters in Eos Tower to get a special item called a Key of the Magic Box. Once you get this, he'll give you the actual magic box. Now, since you have the magic box, now you have to actually open this magic box, and to do that you're going to have to go all the way back to Kerning City, no matter whether you were in Kerning City or Ludibrium, and you have to talk to Mr. Pickle. Yes, this is the one use this NPC has. This is also the one use Chunji has as well, but yeah, once you talk to Mr. Pickle, he's going to say he can open the box, but he needs 1 sapphire and 5 slime bubbles. Or you can just pay him, and honestly it's a lot easier to just get the 10,000 mesos that he needs. So yeah, you can pay him 10,000 mesos or give him those items and he'll give you the final random reward. For the final reward, a player would get 1 item from a random list of items. In this list you could get various equipment, some scrolls like Glove for Attack scrolls or other ones. You could also get ore and potions, but in my opinion the most notable reward that we all probably know about is the black sack. There was a less than 1% chance of getting this black sack, but if you have hundreds of people doing the event, a few of them are bound to get it, right? So yeah, players could get the black sack here, which they could then use to summon the junior Balrog. And this would work basically like anywhere really, like in towns or like PQ gathering areas or whatever. Like there's actually a lot of videos from back in the day of people taking this black sack and summoning it in like the KPQ area or the LPQ area to just kill lots of newbies who just had no chance of being able to kill this thing, which led to a lot of kind of frustrating but funny moments. And that's it for all the old events in the game. But there is actually one thing that I found that I really couldn't find the answer for, but I think I kind of know what was going on. So you may have seen this NPC called Chef in Lith Harbor. This NPC never really did anything, and I was always kind of Like, I always wondered what he did back in the day because I had no idea, and every time I talked to him, he never did anything. So basically, what I've found is he actually was a turn-in NPC, which would give you a reward if you had an item called a secret scroll, or also in later versions called a blank scroll. Some of the rewards that he would give you if you had this item, where he would give you one of the following: 100 elixirs, 10 gold plates, 10 bronze plates, 10 orichalcum plates, 10 sapphires, 10 amethysts, or 10 diamonds. And so that kind of makes sense, right? Like, he gives you a reward if you have an item, but the thing I couldn't find is I couldn't find any NPC that actually gives you this blank scroll item. So after talking to some experts about it, I basically concluded that it seems like the blank scroll was an item that was maybe given out manually by GMs during some GM events, like maybe to a player that like won, like, for example, first prize in the like the physical fitness test, or first prize in some other event. I mean, it's all speculation because I don't know for sure, but yeah, just something interesting I wanted to mention since it seemed like it fit in the whole like GM event kind of thing. And so now that we've covered everything having to do with the old forgotten GM events, let's talk about some of the like unused items of early MapleStory, and also items that were just like super rare or forgotten about. Alright, so first let's talk about this really old and forgotten item in Korea called Cutter Moon. This item is kind of well known because it had so many rumors circulating about it back in the day. Apparently, it was an item that was never really intended for players to be able to get it, but somehow some player actually got it, and they said they got it from a Crimson Balrog drop. I guess it might have been on there before the drop table was adjusted to remove it, but it kind of became a super sought after and rare item. Now, one thing I see about this is people seem to think that we never got this item in the US, and by the time we did get a similar looking item, it was called the Eviscerator and it was level 120. I think this is true, and later we did definitely get an item that was level 120 that looks pretty much like this called the Eviscerator, but in looking through the early game files from very early versions of the game, you can actually find that this weapon does exist in GMS. It's not called Cutter Moon, it's called the Eviscerator, but it has the exact same stats as the Cutter Moon in Korea. So we actually did have this even though it wasn't ever obtainable, I guess. It was never in any drop tables, so nobody was able to even get it by accident, but it did exist, which I think was kind of cool. If you want to learn more about this story, Togain has a great video talking about the whole Cutter Moon story and all the people involved in it, so you can go check that out. I'll link that in the description. They already talked about it, I just wanted to include it here just to be complete, you know. And speaking of that, another thing I want to mention in this video is in the first month of Korean MapleStory, apparently Stolen Fences had 15 defense. This is a shield that normally later on would only have 5 defense, but in the first month of the game being live, it had an average of 15 defense by default and was able to get as high as 17 defense on it. Eventually later, it was rebalanced to be only 5 defense, but 15 defense stolen shields became sought after they were no longer available to be obtained. So now let's talk about some of the unused use items. There's not too many of these, but it seems like there were 2 of them. One is like this like weird eyeball, which doesn't seem to do anything when it's used, but it is a use item that has its own unique sprite, so I kind of wonder what that was going to be used for. And the next one is like this like fire feather, which looks just like the flaming feather, which is a etc item that is used for crafting in the final game, but this one's a use item and doesn't really seem to do anything. But they did have the data in the files for this, so I kind of wonder what they were potentially intending for these to be used for. The first thing I think of, weirdly enough, is like a Phoenix Down Final Fantasy style like Phoenix feather that you could use to like revive party members or something. But I have no idea if that's like anything they were even thinking of. One thing they also had in the game files was 2 unused setup items, one called Luck Sack and one called Lucky Dish. I have no idea what these were going to be used for potentially, but they do seem to have like some like Korean theming around them, as you can tell from the description. So yeah, just kind of interesting to mention here. And now let's go to some of these like cool unused etc items that I found. So first there's these like interesting stamp items that I found. So these are 4 different stamps that have different monsters from the game on them, and people seem to think that this was going to be maybe used for the note system in the game, but that system was never actually used in GMS, so I guess that's why they never used the stamps, but they are in the game files and they look pretty cute in my opinion. Next we have this like interesting etc item called Lucas's Watch. So you probably know Lucas is an NPC who has a lot of quests for like beginners on Maple Island in Amherst. He kind of has like a quest line, depending on the version you play, between like him and an NPC from like 2 maps to the left. I kind of forget her name, but yeah, so it's possible that this item could have been for a quest they were planning on implementing, where maybe you had to like find Lucas's lost watch. Wacky Racer, who I was talking to on Discord, seems to think that it could potentially be like a quest where, you know, it's like Lucas is not there because he lost his watch and he lost track of time or something like that, which, yeah, all very possible things. But this item is in the game, but it's never obtainable or used anywhere. And another item that's probably a quest item that was never actually used anywhere is Gwen's bag, and this is probably for the NPC called Gwen. He's found deep in the ant tunnel, and he has this whole quest line that you can do in Korea, but for some reason it was never localized to GMS, so we never got it, and I guess for that reason the bag is never obtainable for us. Now, one really cool thing that I found in the game files that was never accessible in I think any part of MapleStory was these, like, there's 7 Tetris piece items in the game, and I have no idea what these are for. Maybe some like event or some quest or some collaboration with Tetris or something, but these are in very early versions of the game, and it's kind of interesting how they're just there with no explanation. Like, you can totally get them and they have a description and name and they work, like you can drop them and stuff, but yeah, they never had a use, so I just wanted to mention them here. Alright, and that's all the etc items, but next we've got this whole list of really, like, kind of cool, in my opinion, unused cash shop items, or items that were maybe used at one point but got removed or were only in certain regions. So first we have these items that actually shows the name of the skill that you use above your head, like when you use a skill. There were a bunch of different ones of these, and they had different ones depending on the class that you were and which job you were. They only exist in first and second jobs, so you can tell they were removed pretty early, but you could buy these and equip them on your weapon, and then when you used a skill for your class, it would display like a cool, like, flashy text above your head saying which skill you used. I guess they got rid of these at some point. I think I remember seeing footage of this somewhere, but people didn't know it was like a cash shop item or something, so I found this was pretty cool to find looking through the game files. So the next thing are these like interesting coupon items. So if you don't know, in Korea they had a channel 20, whereas in GMS we only had channels 1 through 19. But in Korea they had channel 20, and channel 20 actually operated differently than any of the other channels did, in that it was only available for adults over I think 21 or older years old to play. And the way that worked is, in Korea to have a Nexon account, you have to have your like government ID tied to it, so they know exactly how old you are. But anyway, so yeah, channel 20 was adult only, and this coupon called the Pro Adult Ticket would give you temporary bonus EXP on that channel. So apparently it was kind of like a 2x EXP coupon before we even got those. And we also have a bunch of other coupons here that I'll talk about really quick. First, we have this interesting one called a costume coupon, and it says based on the description that you can turn it in to get like a Halloween costume. I have no idea if this was ever implemented or accessible anywhere, but that's what it says it does. So yeah, there's that. And then also apparently they had these other coupons here that don't have names and descriptions, but according to Wacky Racer, it seems like they were kind of like the predecessor to the 2x EXP coupons that worked based on the time of the day. Like if you remember in GMS, we had 2x EXP coupons that allowed you to get bonus EXP, but only for certain hours of the day. And it seems like these coupons were gonna allow you to do just that, because you can see that one of them is like kind of like dawn, one's like sunset, and then one's like middle of the day, and one's like middle of the night. So you can kind of tell that this was like a 2x EXP coupon that worked on certain times of the day. But these items were never actually used, and they were replaced with the normal like red coupons that we got in later versions of the game. Another cash shop item that I think was available in Korea and was fully localized but never actually made accessible in global MapleStory were these like kites or balloons or banners as they're called. And I'll have some footage of me showing this off on the screen here. But yeah, these were like items where you could use them to enter a message and it would place an object on the map that players could double click to see your message and just see floating there. I don't know why these were never brought to GMS because in my opinion they were actually kind of cool. But you can see they're very like Korean themed, like there's literally a Korean kite one. So yeah, these fully were localized and do work, but yeah, we never got them in GMS. Alright, and for the last cash shop item that I found, there's this one called Congratulatory Song. This is a really unique one, and we never got this in GMS either, though I think it was available in Korea. But basically, when you double click this item and use it, it says congratulations on the map and it plays a song. So I guess it was like for if someone like, I don't know, reached a high level or had some like real life accomplishment, like maybe, I don't know, they like graduated college or something, you could like celebrate in MapleStory and play them a little congratulatory song. So yeah, pretty cool in my opinion, but yeah, we never got it. Alright, next let's talk about some unused monsters. So there aren't too many of these, but from what there are, I think it's really cool. So first, there's this kind of weird one that's like a Zachem arm hurt animation that has like a face, and this was never used in the final version of the game, or version of Zachem that we got, but yeah, this does exist, and it's kind of interesting. And next we have one that I think is really cool personally. This is actually the one that prompted me to make this video. So there is this art book that MapleStory released in 2015 that has a bunch of like concept art of like certain areas and stuff, but they also have like monster concept art. So I'll show this on screen, but there's this concept art that the artist did of like some of the deep looty monsters, and you can see here that there is this mob design that went unused, and I have no idea if this was like a mob or like a boss or like a mini boss, kind of like the Thanatos or gatekeepers of Deep Looty, but this design is really cool. And you can see here someone actually created like what this monster could look like based on the sketch, like in the actual final version of the game. And I just love seeing stuff like this. Like I literally saw this and it made me like kind of want to see what else there was out there for like stuff that wasn't used and like was concepts for MapleStory. So as for this monster, it never got put in the final game, unfortunately, but it is pretty cool. And one other thing you can see on this page is they have this like interesting like dark red block golem. I could be crazy, but I don't think this was ever used in the game, so I just wanted to mention it here. One other thing I found that I also thought was kind of cool was there's this like Alinea concept art in this art book, and so I thought I'd just show this as well, since this is, in my opinion, like super cool. And that's all the stuff I have for monsters, so I guess let's talk about some of the next stuff. So this next stuff isn't really content, but it's stuff that admins or GMs of MapleStory used to use to kind of control the game or like moderate the game. So to start off here, we have a window that admins actually use to ban people. As you can see, it says GM tool for this window, and they could input a character name, a duration, reason for ban or blocking as they call it, and just a short description. Nothing really too noteworthy here, but it's just cool that this was in the game files. Next up, we have something a little bit cooler actually. We have a whole map that GMs used. It seems like this map actually had a lot of things that GMs could do, and the NPCs here do a couple of different things. The video I'm showing on screen has a little bit different functionality for these NPCs than what they did in the actual game, but based on what we know they really did, it seems like they were able to give players their closed beta reward, which is the mark of the beta bandana, but only if they were eligible. And the NPCs here could also do things like level up a character or modify their stats or even their job. They could also reset player stats and their HP and their MP and instantly grant things like mesos, weapons, armor, potions, throwing stars, or even bulk amounts of scrolls. Like I'm talking 100 scrolls at a time. I have no idea like what the GMs actually use this for, but the functionality's there and it's kind of interesting. I guess aside from that, this could have just been like a room where GMs could bring a player to do some moderation activities, like maybe helping them recover a lost item, and maybe if they did that, I don't know. Or maybe they just used it to hang out or test things like damage on monsters, but I would imagine they would probably do that on like a test server entirely, so I don't know. Alright, so next up we have one of my absolute favorite things about making this video. I was having a lot of fun researching this. So this is all of the unused music I could find. Now, I've seen a couple of these over the years, but I was actually very surprised by how much more of this I was able to find. I was able to find actually like 6 or 7 unreleased and unused songs that were just like fully finished. So without further ado, let's go take a listen to some of these. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention here is actually something I think a lot of people, including myself until recently, don't know, which is who composed the original MapleStory's soundtrack. So I found the original MapleStory's soundtrack was composed by a person named Coda Sound. I don't know how active they are with making music these days, since this soundtrack was written over 20 years ago, but they do have a SoundCloud profile and a YouTube profile where they've uploaded a lot of their old MapleStory songs. For some of these songs, I think them uploading it was actually the first high quality version of them that we actually got, so huge shout out to them for actually going and doing that. And without further ado, let's take a listen to some of these unreleased songs. So the first one I'm going to talk about here was actually one that we found in the old game files. So this one was in the files, but it was never used. Funny enough, this one is called Where the Barlog From, which I can only assume is a incorrect spelling of Balrog, but based on what we know about this song, apparently in the Korean beta, this was used in the Warrior First Job Advancement room, where Dances with Balrog is. So anytime you go in here, this song would play. Kind of creepy, but I guess it fits the Perion theme, you know? So also in the files there is one other song called Elfwood, which apparently was the Magician First Job Advancement room theme back in the Korean beta, and this was never kept just like the other one in the fully released version of the game, but we do have access to this since it was in the game files, so take a listen. As you can hear, it sounds kind of like the Alinea theme, but almost just like remixed in a more minimal way with different instruments. Pretty cool in my opinion, and it definitely has this like mystical vibe to it. I kind of wish they used it in the final game because I actually really like how it sounds. Alright, so next we have a bit of a short one. This one is called WC Select, or also known as Goin' On. This one was used back in the Korean beta for the world or channel select screen when logging in, so take a listen. As you can hear, it kind of sounds like the maps around Hennessy's, but a little bit different. Kind of cool. Speaking of the Korean beta, we actually have the title theme for that as well. It's kind of interesting, and I'll just let you take a listen really quick. Yeah, that's the whole thing. It's like 8 seconds long, and in my opinion, it's really cool and kind of mystical, but it kind of doesn't sound anything like anything else you hear in the MapleStory soundtrack. So it kind of makes me wonder if it was just like a placeholder that got replaced with the final theme, which is called Maple Land in the final game. That, you know, the one we all know and love, that's like da 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 da. But yeah, anyway, that's it for that one. Alright, so here we have kind of an interesting one. This one I actually thought was unused, and it shows as unused on the MapleStory music catalog website, but I heard from Wacky Racer that apparently this is an alternate Show-A-Town theme that apparently activates and plays for you every time you visit Show-A-Town once you've cleared Show-A-Town's main story questline. I can't really validate if this is true or not because I haven't done it, but yeah, that's what I've heard, so take a listen really quick. As you can hear, it's basically Show-A-Town, but the intro is a lot happier and it just feels more kind of like major key in general. So yeah. Here we have an interesting one. This one was actually never intended to be used in the game and actually did get used, but it's kind of almost like forgotten to time because it's so old. So this is the theme song for the Third Job Flash animation teaser. I'll see if I can find some footage of this to put on the screen, so yeah, take a listen. I think this one is really pretty, honestly, and I quite like it, and it's cool because I think the only reason we have access to the HD file of this song is because the composer actually uploaded it to their YouTube channel, so again, shout outs to them for doing that. Alright, so now for our last song, we have a really cool one in my opinion. I mean, I know I keep saying they're all cool, but I really like this one. I wanted to save a really good one for last. So this one's called Road to You, and it's an unused but completely finished, in my opinion, it sounds like, song for Ludibrium, or like an area around Ludibrium. Just take a listen. To me, it almost sounds like a normal theme from Ludi, but a little bit different. It uses all the same kind of motifs from other Ludi songs and the same instrumentation, and I kind of wonder where it would have been used if it was used. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, they decided not to use it, but at least we have it here. Alright, and that's it for all the unused music I could find. I think there's some for later versions of MapleStory as well, but I didn't include those because I just wanted to include stuff that would have been like from the game's very early days or like early to mid 2000s. So yeah, if you want to hear the full version of any of these songs, I'll leave a link to all of them in the description down below. Also, fun fact, while I was doing research for this, I actually was looking at the names of the songs in the game, and I found that the main title theme for MapleStory is called Maple Land. As you might know, there's a really popular Korean MapleStory server on MapleStory Worlds that is the most popular old school server in Korea that is also called Maple Land, so it's kind of cool. That might have been where they got their inspiration from, because the main theme of the game is called Maple Land. Alright, so now we have kind of another interesting one. This one is an unused NPC called Maneki Neko. This one was brought to my attention by Wacky Racer on Discord as well, so shout out to them, and it seemed like they put a lot of research into this, so thank you to them for that. So a while ago, Wacky Racer was looking at the game files for early versions of MapleStory, like even like very, very early versions, and they found this interesting like NPC art and like kind of like quest information and item information for this NPC called Maneki Neko, and they had no idea what this NPC was for, but eventually we found the answer. So even though Maneki Neko has been in the game files since even as early as the alpha Korean MapleStory client, I couldn't find any information that said that it was ever made available even in Korean MapleStory. The first information I have that it was made available is actually for Japanese MapleStory. And in Japanese MapleStory, it was introduced on January 29th, 2004. This was just a few months after the Japanese MapleStory launch in August of 2003, and just 3 months later this NPC was actually removed, and I'll tell you why. So apparently the answer to the puzzle here is actually that this NPC was the predecessor to Gachapon. Apparently the way it worked based on the information that we have is that each town on Victoria Island had one of these NPCs. They looked identical in each town, but apparently they had different NPC IDs, so they are separate NPCs. It seems like the way they worked is there were 6 different fortune cookie message items that you could give them. I have no idea where you got these items, but apparently you could turn them into these NPCs and they would give you a random item back as a reward. It's kind of cool because as you can see there's 6 different ones of them, and they all range from like excellent luck to worst luck, which is pretty different than the Gachapon system we have where we just have one ticket that we know of from the cash shop. So it's kind of cool how you could have different levels of tickets. But yeah, I guess after being in the game for about 3 months, they decided to remove this NPC on April 23rd, 2004 in Japanese MapleStory, and they replaced it with the normal Gachapon that we all know. So even though this NPC continued to stay in the game files for a while, it was never really used again to my knowledge. And we definitely didn't get to see it in GMS. Alright, and for our last one here, we have a pretty big one actually. This actually probably would have been a pretty big thing outside of global MapleStory, but we never got it there, and this is the Internet Cafe. Internet cafes were, and probably still are, a pretty big deal in a lot of Asian countries like Korea. So in MapleStory, they had a map that was exclusive for people who were logging in from internet cafes. If you weren't logging in from an internet cafe and were just logging in from your home, it was impossible to reach this area, which probably explains why we never got to see it in GMS, because in the US we don't really have internet cafes. So yeah, there was no way to access these maps. So let's talk a little bit about what you could expect to find in these maps. It was kind of hard to get information for exactly what the intended purpose of this map was, or what it exactly did back in the day, but I tried my best to gather up as much correct information as possible. So as you can see here, there is a vending machine on the bottom right that sells 4 consumable items that are just basic food really. But the main star of the show is actually these computers on top. If you talk to them, you have the option to get warped to several maps that you can grind on, either solo or with a party. Apparently these maps could only be accessed for a limited time, but while you were in them you got a 20% EXP boost compared to hunting normal monsters. And the monsters also dropped all their normal drops, but one thing they also dropped is they dropped a special item that's like a computer mouse. And this could be turned in back at the Internet Cafe home spot for a bunch of like different rewards. Here on the screen, I'll show some of the rewards that you could get. I don't think all these are necessarily accurate to what it was like back in the day, but probably the ones that are like potions, food, return scrolls, or jewels, screws, and things like that. So now let's take a look at some of the maps that you could actually grind on. I'm going to play some videos of the maps here, and as you can see, they're basically kind of like areas in the game that are like other areas in the game. Like you have Golem's Temple, you have some like ant tunnel maps, you have like the wild cargo area, wild boar area, and they're pretty similar to the ones in the open world, but they are a little bit different. And it's kind of cool going through these because just like the GM event maps, to me they have this like vibe of like finding new maps in old MapleStory that have the same vibe as like back in those days, but they're just completely new maps I've never seen before, which is really cool. Also, one thing I want to note is these maps actually had kind of an interesting name. They are called premium maps. And you know how like a lot of maps on Victoria Island are called like Victoria Road, you know, like Victoria Road Hennessy's, Victoria Road Kerning City. These ones were called Premium Road. And I'm guessing the reason they called it this is because the internet cafe was kind of like a premium spot players could go to because they could grind to get like a little bit of like a bonus EXP boost and like special like rewards. So this is like a premium area. And I guess one final thing to say about this area is the internet cafe does actually have its own theme song, which you've probably heard a little bit earlier as I was showing the footage. It's called Play With Me, and I'll play a little bit of it solo just here right now because I think it's pretty cool. Alright, and that's it for the internet cafe. This was an area that, again, I had never seen before, but did exist in very, very early versions of MapleStory. So yeah, it's just really cool to see, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Alright, so I know I said that was the final thing in this video, but I do have one little bonus thing that I'm not going to go too into, but I did want to show it off a little bit in this video. So back in the day in Korea, and apparently around 2006, MapleStory did a collaboration with Coca-Cola, and they had this kind of interesting event area called Coke Town. You may have heard of this area because it's actually kind of well known because like it was so iconic and like the music was so good for the main area. So I'll have to definitely play some of that in the background right now. But yeah, I didn't really do too much research into exactly what like any quest lines in this area were or anything, but I just wanted to show some footage on the screen right now and play some of the music so that you could kind of see what this area was, because even though it's not like, you know, base game vanilla MapleStory, so it's not like true beta content or like true like unused content, I just thought it was really cool, and I definitely kind of wish that we had this in the US because I think I would have liked playing it as a kid. I might go more into this area in like a future video, but I don't know, so I just wanted to mention it here really quick. Alright, and that's it. That's all I was able to compile for now for a bunch of lost beta content or like super early content from MapleStory that we either didn't really see or went unused or was kind of forgotten. So I hope you liked seeing all this. Hopefully it was a bunch of new stuff that would kind of show you cool new areas of maybe one of your favorite games that you had never seen before. I will say right now there are definitely things that I'm probably missing and things that I'm not covering in this video that I'm just not aware of, because one thing I've learned while researching for this video is that even though this game is super old, there was a lot of stuff back in the day that a lot of us just had no idea about, that we had no idea it existed or was in the game files, and so I wouldn't be surprised if there's enough content for me to even make like another one of these videos in the future, but this one should be good for now, and I just wanted to get this one out there because I think it's like super cool. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I know this is probably a pretty long video, so thanks for watching all the way through, and I hope you had fun. We're currently just waiting for Classic World to get released, hopefully later this year, so yeah, I'll see you on Classic World when it gets released, and I'm going to keep trying to upload content every now and then of just like cool things having to do with like old early MapleStory. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video.